All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome, or whatever time you're in. Welcome to Create a World. Um, Create a World started a year or more ago, 2 years by now, I think. And it started because a number of us who've known each other for a good while, we call ourselves collaborators. Um, and over the years, as we worked together, talked together, just engaged in whatever ways, the the important parts for us were some of the important parts were to explore and practice what is intimacy, what is transparency, what is the next highest order, if we want to call it that, of being together. We call it with each other in the field. So, just in sharing across many topics and asking questions and discovering the curiosity we had for each other's worlds, we discovered how important really being present for the unique and essential aspects of each other was, and how to weave these states into our lives and let ourselves be changed by that. Then we decided to include other people from other communities to keep expanding our exploration and of intimacy and transparency. So learning about what they'd been doing, what they'd been present to regarding life, each other, new worlds, new realities, um, how to be in the world, got really, really interesting. And we discovered that many, many people were present to something's rising, and they felt very called to uh, contribute their spin on that, their unique and essential aspects. So we made this curiosity public, and it became Create a World. And we use conversation to highlight and explore ways to be and contribute in the world. And that's, like I said, Create a World. Today's conversation is going to be different than what we had sent out because Tantra is in the hospital having some tests for a range, some her blood pressure's been spiking and she's had some issues with her heart. That's the short version. So she's having some tests done and can't be here today. But we decided to go ahead with the topic because I've also had my health journey. And having part of that journey's been restoring my own cognitive capacity. And as I was taking notes and preparing, I discovered that this is a bigger conversation than I'd realized. And it very probably will be more than one episode and probably should be. And Victoria is joining us here. She is uh Victoria, say the name of your work, please.
Vibrant Soul Coaching.
Yes. Thank you. And she really is a vibrant soul, and she's here to support me. And interestingly enough, as many of these as I've done, I'm nervous today. And I don't know, it may be because, I've not really talked much about my health journey. And I'm going to just give you a little background, but I'm going to focus on the things that I think are important. I don't want to drown you in the huge amount of detail. So I think it was January 2021 that I got treated for atrial fibrillation. And I had a fairly stressful job working in community mental health. It actually is not fairly, I shouldn't understate it.
Right.
Victoria. So and let me just back up to even before that. So I grew up in a very dysfunctional household with a lot of traumatic stress. And I'm just going to leave that there because that's a huge, long story, lots of dimension to that. But I know now that has had a big contribution to my baseline health. Then, as I continued to really not be very well connected to body, mostly because I couldn't align with the mechanistic engagement. It just didn't feel right. And if that was actually body, it actually was irritating to me. And then as I kept meeting people like Victoria, I've been able to, I'm going to say, melt that view. And they've been able to help have their comprehension of body. I'm saying they because Victoria represents a number of people right now for me. But their comprehension of body kept soaking into my world until it clicked. And I'm starting to get it as a whole living organism. But then in January, I got treated for atrial fibrillation. And the following year, February 2022, I got diagnosed with congestive heart failure. And I injured my leg and back. Then another, I don't know, 4 or 5 months later, I tore a tendon. And I've had and reactions to medicine, allergic reactions and so forth and so on. So it's been very complicated in terms of all the physical things because, like Tantra and Victoria, many of us that we've been coming to know, I can't relate to the world in the what's considered normal. My body doesn't even operate in that linear mechanistic kind of way. So that's been a factor. How do I want to? Tantra was very interested in the return to cognitive wholeness from a mystical point of view. And I do think that expanded consciousness has a lot to do with that. And I'm discovering that I'm having to redefine what's cognitive wholeness. And I'll tell you about that in a minute. So, so there was that. My function's been really diminished, or it was. It's coming back. I've had a lot of difficulties with the medical system, which many of you can relate to. For example, I didn't realize it till I was taking notes to prepare for this morning. Nobody, not one nurse, not one doctor, nobody talked to me about what the diagnosis of congestive heart failure meant. I didn't realize it till last night. Nobody has had that conversation.
Wow.
And I started to be upset about it. And then I thought, no, I think I'm glad. Because I have nothing that I have to push against to keep it out of my field. I don't want their information to limit what I think is possible. So I actually think I'm glad. And I don't know what's possible. So let me stop there for a second. Anything for you, Victoria, at the moment?
Deb, I have so many things swirling in what you've said already.
All right.
So I think one of the pieces that I think I'd love to have conversation around is this idea that maybe none of us are linear, mechanistic bodies.
I think that's true.
And
I
it
think
made
that's
me
pretty.
think about how in the Fibonacci spiral, there we have the boxes within the spiral of how I'm going to relate it to my thinking in this moment, how we think about ourselves in relationship to body and being.
Mm,
And we have a box. And then we can think beyond the first box, like congestive heart failure. That's a box of what we think about that.
mm-hmm,
And what you said was, well, I'm glad I don't know their definition of it, because I can think into a box and a box beside it, two boxes version of it,
mm-hmm,
and how we start to expand our consciousness in that very way.
mm-hmm.
So that's probably the biggest piece of the conversation that I kind of glue together. And that's all I'll say right now. So
That's really beautiful. Thank you, especially for the input on the Fibonacci spiral and, the little mathematical boxes. I'm sorry I don't have a way to bring that up to show people real quick, if anyone's not familiar, but I'll put a link. I'll remember to provide a link to put
perfect.
up at the end of the video, at the end of the um, presentation today. So that's a really important piece. I honestly think none of us are linear mechanistically. Um, in fact, in my studies I've read, uh, I'm really grateful for Saybrook University and the literature, the research that they expose us to. One of the books we read, was called The Myth of Normal.
Hmm.
And it really just busts apart that normal is not actually healthy and real. Normal is a severe box, a very diminishing box. And in other conversations, I've talked about how I observe, feel, believe, and witness how much humanity in Western civilization is redacted.
Hmm.
So, those are the important parts that I'm getting to, that I discovered are not simple in sharing about my journey. So I discovered that, um, so the second part of what I discovered is what I thought cognitive wholeness was, and restoring cognitive function is also redacted. It's shrunk, it's confined, it's limited. And I think that's true for all of us. I think there's a lot going on in the world and a lot of awakening consciousness experiences and events that are demonstrating our cognition is, as we knew it in modern Western society, is like this big, and it's probably really this big, Um, but it requires a lot of adjustment. It still requires adjustment in terms of who we think we are as individuals, as uh, human beings. Um, there's personality changes. And I think I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me say that first, I could tell I not only had limitations to how much I could do in a day, which was, I was very offended by it too, very offended. I'm used to being one of those people that, you just go, go, go. I'm, I would say a personality construct of mine is to push the river. Don't tell me I can't do it. Don't tell me it can't be done. Don't tell me I need to live one human lifetime not 3 at a time. I'd really push the river and was very doing oriented, while at the same time, not very not. But things like being really tired, not having the same capacity for a while, having to work out any of a number of things. When I tore the tendon in my foot, and the doctor's first instant thing was, "Oh, you need surgery." That may have been accurate. It probably what he seemed like a good person. It may have been from his point of view, from his expertise and his composition of life. But for me, I had just worked my way back up to being able to get out in the garden a little bit. And that was a quality of life that I couldn't let go of. So I said no. And there has to be another way. And he didn't really believe there was another way, but he told me I could wear a brace and it might heal. That's the short version. And that was the beginning of me choosing quality of life, not trying to fit back into what I used to be, how I used to be, who I used to be. And I might need to get my foot re-looked at and decide, do I need surgery or not? But it's, that's a year plus that I've been working with it, with my little leg and foot and stuff. And the quality of my life is changing. Different focuses, different choices, different whatever. And I do have a strong will and a strong being. So there's a lot of progression, a lot more to go. And I may have to accept certain limitations, but I'm not so sure that's a bad thing. Because I've been watching, how part of how I keep myself motivated sometimes is, I'll watch little YouTube shorts of people who've restored their function from different life events. And if I have to wear a brace for the rest of my life, what's the big deal? There's many, many, many people who have a tremendously more successful life than I do from a bunch of different markers, who wear prosthetics, who use wheelchairs, who they have all kinds of tools to, assist their function. And that started me thinking, well, so do I, so does everybody. We have different tools, different ways we engage ourselves and assist our function. So my focus really started to be, like I said, on quality of life. And if you've got anything, Victoria, just jump in, interrupt me.
Okay.
Go for it.
Thanks. What I heard you saying that I think is such an expansion beyond the box. I'm still with that.
Yeah.
In a cognitive way, the expansion is I'm in this experience and okay, I'm going to redefine what I think about that experience. And in doing that, I'm going to take a moment to reflect and assess in myself what are the skills, what are the strengths, what are the capacities that I either need to tap into or that I need to build within myself and grow in order to have that definition hold true for me. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if it's gardening, how do I have that experience occurring in my life? Well, what is my capacity? What is the growth that I need in myself in order to have that experience.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that pops up for you, if there's something specific that you found yourself doing or believing or changing within yourself in order to maintain that quality.
Yes, I would agree completely. Thank you. So one example is, you know, in the beginning or right close to the diagnosis, and certainly after I bunged up my leg, first I pulled a muscle up in my thigh and hip. That took quite a while to heal. Then I tore my tendon, both of them on the left leg. So I never did look up the symbolism in terms of certain understandings of the body, like Louise Hay and some others. And I'm sorry, I forgot the name of the person Electra told me about. I never did that. I just thought, no, I think I just need to just, in a way, keep going, but not the way. I just didn't want to be distracted by other people's definitions. So, with all kinds of stuff going on and a lot of perceptions now, especially from the medical field, of who I was and what I'd be able for. They gave me a walker, a rollator, with the wheelies, with the wheels, and that is what I call it. I call it my wheelie. So first off, that was one level. Was am I going to accept their definition of me based on sometimes it was their comfort level? Because if I'm out in public, I'm very slow. I especially back then I'd have to sit down a lot and then keep going. Sometimes I'd get short of breath, and that made people feel uncomfortable. And then there just was a lot of assumptions in the medical field. I'm an older person now. I've crossed the 60-year-old threshold. Um, and you could feel it. I'm sure many of you have this experience. I could feel the uh, what's the word I want, Victoria? I could feel their perceptions.
Mhm.
She's old.
Well, we have a
It,
box about what it means to be 60 plus.
yes.
I know I had someone I was in conversation with recently that was talking about working with senior citizens. And I said, could you define that for me? And she said,
Mm-hmm.
well, generally 60 plus. And I said, oh, I guess I'm a senior citizen and didn't know it. So here again, it's this idea of the boxes. And do we define ourselves only in the first box? Do we expand beyond? Do we keep expanding? Like, give that a place that in our culture, 60
Mm.
plus is senior citizen label. And what does that look like?
Yep.
I,
And what does give it a place mean?
and 60 plus looks like you and I together having a conversation.
A fairly alive and cognitively clear conversation. So, but that was a part of it. And for me, giving it a place was accepting that that's a condition of life, like the grass is green. I decided not to put my energy in really resisting that, just be who I am, because it was fairly pervasive and there were a lot of assumptions about that I would just be compliant and so forth. And it actually rattled some of the doctors I've engaged with to be saying, well, what's this medication? Tell me about this. I read up on that, and because I was having certain side effects. So I did my research and to question and to say, no, I'm not doing that. We have to find another way. Um, if you want this result and I want this result, how are we going to get there in a way that actually forwards my life, not reduces my life. That really kind of shook some people up. And that did surprise me. But now that I'm in a place of accepting it, in the sense of it exists, not accepting it like folding into that box, then I can just move with it. But to go back to the example, so they gave me the wheelie. Well, I don't need it. I decided, even though technically in the beginning I probably could have used it inside the house, I just said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to build my capacity other ways. And it took a while, but I did that. So I can move very fluidly through the house. Well, not very fluidly, comparatively speaking. I can move through the house well. But I just got so excited because the ground in my yard is not super even. And we've had a lot of moles and stuff, or voles, whichever one. So there's lots of little holes. So using the rollator outside gives me free range in the garden. So I just tootle around in my garden, and then when I'm at whatever plant, I sit down. So it's a so you might call that repurposing, I don't know. But it was in terms of cognitive capacity, I don't know that that's what's totally considered cognitive capacity, but for me it is, because it has to do with the attitude. It has to do with my perception and orientation, what you're calling the boxes. And I think that's when we put that on the uh, description at the end of the video that Christina does for us, the to see that, I think that's a really good image of how it had to go to unfold, reconfigure, and make choices of relating to life. Now here's another part.
Well, let me pop in for a moment,
Yeah.
because cognitive capacity for me personally is beyond the belief of something. It's also the relationship of how I think from a body place.
Oh, say that sentence again, please.
Yeah,
It's
it's how I think from a body place. And I use the word sentience in that particular way. And so I got curious that as you're repurposing your wheelie, as you're telling me the story, my body was like feeling the movement forward of you out in your yard, right? So that's my body saying, oh, I know that movement. I know that way of being it in relationship with what I'm thinking I'll do. And so I just want to encourage that we our whole body, not just the brain part up here, thinks.
mm-hmm.
Right? The feet think. The nervous system is the whole highway system of feeling the registers and the gut digestion. So it's like we're this whole thinking being, and we're in relationship to the thought that occurs. I'll just repurpose my wheelie and I
Mm-hmm.
can expand into the next box or even into the next box of
Mm-hmm.
how I am in relationship, not only in myself, but now in the garden, in the world, in nature.
Yes,
And so I just want to, I want to pull that out a little more.
that was beautifully said. Thank you. Because, yes, I think most of us think cognitive capacity. I did too. Not because I actually believe that, but because I didn't deeply examine or have reason to deeply examine what cognitive wholeness is. So you bringing in the sentient piece, the aspect of sentience, is really vital, I think. Thank you. That was very well said. And I think that's an aspect of the mystic. Because for Tantra, originally, piece of this, when it was going to be Tantra and I, that was something that she's been very interested in, and me too, just from a little, just different perspectives. And is the what is it? How does this have to do with being a mystic? What does this have to do with activating mysticism in each of us? And I would say, just like you said earlier, I think that's just part of what it is to be human. And then different people have more or less expression of that in their constitution, is what I'm thinking. So to have cognition expand to include sentience, like you're saying, is really important and could be a big, long conversation.
It's the being part of
Yes,
human being.
yes. And it definitely, like, I'm steering off of resonance. I'm steering off of what's having me open up into, not close down into uh, the boxes of the Western society, the redactions. And I'm first off, that's kind of like how my mind works anyway,
Hmm.
not just from a, oh, there she goes again kind of place, but a genuine, that's, I move towards what has me or someone open up into some aspect of their existence that adds life force energy, that or activates more or accesses more. That's the word I wanted, access. So that's a dimension of cognition that's astonishing. There's definitely the parts of retention, like when I was reading things and studying, and go back and reread that stuff a couple of months later, and I could see how much I didn't absorb or process closer to the illness events. I can tell how much I didn't. So there's that aspect of cognition. But I have been improving my physical health also, with walking. I've lost 50 pounds by changing my eating habits. Plenty more to go, but do you know what? So there's more and more opening up into something. Victoria, you seem to be having so much better articulation than me today. So again, jump in. And that is factoring into my thinking capacity in terms of how cognition is more typically considered, you know? Um, but then there's these other aspects. And here's one that I almost missed, except for the serendipity of life. Um, in fact, I wouldn't have brought it in. I During my lunch hours and stuff like that, I scroll through the YouTube, and I love all the puppy ones and the kitten ones, the little ones that, but I like lots of other stuff. There's a psychiatrist named Gabor Mate. Many of you may have heard of him. And he is the author of, I think it is called The Myth of Normal. And he also wrote a book called When the Body Says No. It's pretty dense, but it's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. But he did a YouTube talk. That's one of the links I'm gonna ask Christina to put on. And it was called How to Reset Your Body from Chronic Stress. So I listened to that, and all he talks about, in a very, he his voice is lovely, for starters, for me. And but he's so down to earth and gentle. It's worth just listening to him for a few minutes for that alone. But he talks about how many illnesses are often, in his experience and research over a couple of decades, they have their roots in people not having access to their authentic self. And that traumatic stress is often the source of that lack of access.
Hmm.
Not always, but often, because many of the things that occur for people end up unconscious. Your choices and your how you put together how you relate to others, which for me is part of the personality. I define personality as the expression of your interface, the expression of who you think you are with the world. That's not everybody's definition of personality, but it is mine. And so, uh, a lot of adverse events, especially in childhood, really define narrow boxes of how one can interface with the world and have. Yeah. What, Christina? Okay. How it puts a severe box, which limits access to the authentic self.
Yeah,
And
it's like what you're saying. We've talked about the beliefs, we've talked about how the body sentience comes
yes,
online, and now I feel like you're bringing in the emotional capacity to express who we are. And often in trauma, it it gets it's unexpressed. It doesn't have its own place to scream like a banshee when you need to, as some
yes,
of us say, right? Or to, for me, with movement, that's an expression of the emotional as well as a physical and the belief. It gives me the ability to open up into, as you had used earlier. And and I think all three of these aspects give us our authentic
that's correct. Yes,
access point. And generally, don't know, but generally I would suspect most of us are um, pretty strong in one area, and we need more experience and more growth in other areas. Maybe we do two of them pretty well, but we have one that we just don't give attention to. We don't open up into as readily, um, for whatever reason.
for
Like,
whatever
who cares
reason.
what the reasons are? It's becoming aware. And part of the authentic life is building your capacity to be aware beyond how you see yourself today. What
Yes,
you build it to see yourself beyond who you are, beyond the personality, and how you're in relationship to everything else. So
yes,
I love how you've brought all three aspects, because that's for me how I um organize or operate myself. Is I want to give attention to the ways in which I am in all three
hmm
simultaneously, if
yes,
possible.
right. And the only reason to care where it comes from, because you could get stuck in that rabbit hole forever, but there's a lot of reasons to care so that you can access the right tools.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And if that tool is a therapist, fine. If that tool is me getting surgery on my tendon, fine. I don't think it is for me, but you get the point.
Okay.
It's that's what
I said, okay.
But the point is, that's the reason to care.
Yes.
And you may not have access to the source for a long time. Just tack towards
Yeah.
with what you do have access to. And his points, though, about authentic self, and he was speaking, it's really beautiful. He does not talk in that mental, heady way at all, which is such a beautiful thing to see. There's a few resources that I've come across as psychiatrists or people who've done research that are very grounded in their relationship to themselves, life and others. And I can listen to them more readily, which I think is a function of making peace with my own cognitive capacity.
Mm.
Instead of me thinking, which I did for a while, like, what's wrong with me? I'm not really, thinking this way as well, or like in the studying information, the data kind of way. For example, I'm having trouble studying for the licensing exams, and listening to someone somewhere in the last few weeks, I realized it's because it's so dense in just data,
Mm.
very overarching summaries. Some research is left out that I think is important, different things like that. And it's to create a standardization across a knowledge base for all psychologists. Well, I have a lot of disagreement with what they're selecting as a knowledge base, but that was round one of just come to the acceptance of this is what it is. That was round one. Round two was, oh my God, I just can't be with this information. But when I realized it was just a compression
Mm-hmm.
and they leave out the beingness, that's just the way it is. So I can study now a little bit better. I'm still working it, because then I go do something that gives attention to my being,
Mm-hmm.
or like being in the garden or whatever I choose. So I'm now making it a weft and weave. The point is, what was my point? I've expanded what I'm comprehending as cognition. You're using the word sentience, and I'm thinking that that's pretty doggone accurate in terms of an overarching comprehension and composition of what cognitive wholeness is. And it's going to vary from person to person, because like someone like Tantra has more of the mystical um, aspects of being in her nature, her composition, her constitution. And then there's others who have less, they have more of something else. And so that's part of the whole composition. But I want to go back to Dr. Mate's points.
Let me pop a
Yeah.
response in before you do that. Um, Rather than a more or a less perspective, Tantra may locate in a mystical point of view and has more access in that way. And someone else, their design, that unique way of being, is to bring forth more a different kind of cognitive capacity. And that's what I hear you saying is, if we can give ourselves permission to be our own unique
Mhm.
design that we came here to be, then we can form a community of unique designs that all mutually benefit
Mhm.
and operate within our lanes, if you will. But the lane isn't redacted, as you were saying. The lane is
Yes.
simply your access in, and then the expression of comes out. And I think that's what
Yes.
you're saying about Gabor, is that his unique expression comes out in this particular capacity and way. Tantra's comes and weaves this capacity and way. Yours and ours come and weave our capacities. And so then everyone is interwoven in that. And if we are being our unique essential selves, then we are in the authenticity of who we are as human and being.
Yes.
And it's all interacting, interdependent. Oh, those words that come back to me, interrelated, all of that.
Yes.
And that's the cohesion of living in a sense of unity with one another in relationship.
Yes. Yes. I agree completely. Beautifully said.
So
Because
how does
actually,
Gabor come in now?
um, well, he comes in with that particular focus of opening people up into, um, I think, opening people up into a disavowal of your authentic self, disavowal of including yourself in the composition of your life, puts undue stress on the body and can result in illness. That's his focus in that particular video and other pieces of work. I would say that's true in that work, The Myth of Normal.
So
That
I'm curious, Deb, when you say that this is the lens, and everything that you've shared about your own health experience, how does that grow you into a greater capacity that he's talking about of bringing your authentic self forward rather than disavowing it? I'm just real like that seems really important. Can you share that?
yeah, I think that I do think that a lot of my health issues, including diabetes. Now, this is for me, people. I'm not making rules. You need to look at this, or excuse me, please look at this for your own self. I do assert that everything we're saying can provide openings for a lot of people in a lot of different ways. But what I'm about to say, and I do think what I'm about to say is true for a lot of people, but I'm not making a rule out of it. Okay. So, given that I started my formative years and all that were with a very dysfunctional family and a lot of traumatic stress. Stress is not the same as trauma. Traumatic stress is kind of the term in my field. So that really interrupted a lot of what would have been a healthy unfolding of self for me, as it does for a lot of other people. And I chose lots of adaptation. Excuse me. A lot of adaptation occurred so I could still belong, still get a few crumbs of love, all that kind of stuff. I'm really super condensing that piece of conversation, people. And those adaptations became what is kind of conventionally called survival mechanisms now. And I can look back and see, yeah, this led to that, to that, to that, to that, not necessarily in a linear fashion. Um, and I've done a lot of work to restore, to heal, to access what I knew I was reaching for, what I never, thank heavens, lost touch with, but didn't always have a way to articulate. So, yes, I do think that many things of my history of life, many choices, um, led to the printout that of bad health that I've had,
And that
including congestive heart failure.
and that now you're in a reconfiguration of that. And
And
how
that's
does the cognitive wholeness of you language that reconfiguration? Does that
if
make
yes, if all first off, I'm not dead.
sense?
So so that means there to me, my thought process is therefore there's elasticity still. We don't know the limits of the human body. I don't know what choices I have to make. Like, for example, if I went according to the kind of the unspoken communication towards me of now you're an older person, now you have this diagnosis, therefore these are your limitations. If I drank that in, that would be a kind of unconscious choice of my limitations. But I'm like, why would I do that? That's my thought process. Why would I do that? But I can't accept that I'm not 20 anymore either. So chances are pretty good I'm not going to go back to what I was like when I was 20, except I keep looking up stuff on YouTube of, 91-year-old woman who just won some, I think she was 91. She was somewhere in that range. Actually, there were two of them, who's now a bodybuilder. And she's won competitions. And there was one 80-something-year-old woman who became a gymnast. I mean, like you watch on TV gymnast.
There
So
are definitely some skills and capacities that they developed within themselves, body,
yes,
mind, emotions, to create that.
that's
Right?
right. Now, I don't want to be a gymnast. I don't
Exactly.
want to be a bodybuilder.
It goes back to what I asked you before, the experiences that you want to have. What are the skills and capacities that
Yes,
will help you have those experiences? So we get out of that comparison idea. And I was thinking a moment ago about the beloved Thich Nhat Hanh. Wherever you go, there you are. Wherever
yes,
you go, what experiences you want to have in your lifetime,
yes, yes,
there you are. What are those skills, capacities,
yes,
strengths that you are bringing to
yes.
having those experiences? And it
I
doesn't matter what it is.
It doesn't matter.
You
So
define it.
I watch those videos to be inspired
Yeah.
and to soak up the ways of being,
Yes.
to not put myself in a box,
Yeah.
to now I do want to restore capacity to the point where I can oh, garden away and fulfill my dreams of my garden.
So
That's
that's
going
your
to take something.
experience.
So right, I do want that. That's my being a
Yeah.
bodybuilder. That's my
And
dream,
what's
my
it going to
comparison.
take? What's it going to take for you to have that experience of you gardening the way you see yourself in your mind? What are the strengths, capacities, practices that you have to take on? And you don't have to say them now because I know we're getting towards the end of our hour, but I'm kind of saying it out loud for all of us.
That's right.
What there's
Well, I do want to say
experiences
some
that
of
you
them.
want.
I do want to say some of them.
Okay.
One is to keep my thinking, sentience, thank you, fluid and elastic. The another is keeping fear reduced. We've had a lot of conversation on this broadcast over, not a lot, but some about the role and purpose of fear. So I don't want to do all of it, but for me, there's a lot of, I see too many people accepting too much fear. So for me personally, I'm an ongoing investigation of what to not allow because if it makes a limitation. Learning when to ask for help more. Learning how to establish, like, what if I'm not going to ever be able to lift the bags of soil the way I used to, or whatever, just that, and or do this or do that. So what's the problem of learning to hire somebody? What's the problem of me figuring out how to generate a little teeny gardening community in my neighborhood so that we all help each other? Those are the kinds of things that I've been considering as an example to answer your question.
Yeah.
In terms of other physical function, well, I someone we know that has cerebral palsy once said to me that she was at the grocery store and she was trying to reach something, and someone said, "Oh, can we help you?" And she said, "Well, I don't think so yet, because this is like my physical therapy." So she said, "Life is physical therapy." That struck me so great. Reaching for things, um, whatever, all kinds of
Yeah.
using my little wheelie to get to a different piece of the garden. All kinds of things. Learning to walk my dog again is different now because she can pull. So that means I have to train her better, which means I have to move, which feeds back to strengthening my body, strengthening my relationship with my dog. Do you see? There's saying no to certain things. I can't attend to this or this or this.
And
Or,
I'd just like to, I'd like to, because I know we've got just a few minutes, and I'd like
yeah,
to just respond to the strengthening of my body. That that's a very pragmatic kind of thing that gives you the experience of gardening. And I think sometimes we have these lofty notions that we have to do amazing things in order to have the experiences that we want. And I would say that there may be a little bit of the mystical showing up to say,
right.
if I do practices that strengthen my muscles, I get to have my experience of gardening maybe beyond what I think my capacity is. We shall see.
Yes,
I'll be curious about it. And so I just wanted to make sure that we gave space for that, that it may be more the everyday. Like like I'll kind of close mine to say I used to teach yoga to my students in a way that said, how do you do this everyday yoga?
brilliant.
I haven't done
Yes.
that in a long time. And I was like, oh, maybe I want to bring that back for all of us to use everyday yoga to have the experiences. What would that look like? So that's just an idea that
It's
you
it's brilliant. It's like
tingled into
I
my
got like
mind.
1 minute, but it's like
Yeah.
planting one strawberry plant is then the whole garden.
Yeah.
In that moment, that's it.
So
Not, yeah. So
how did you plant a seed? How did we plant a seed today for those who listen to this to expand their cognitive
yeah,
wholeness? And in doing that, they expand how to be more authentically who they are.
exactly. Exactly. Yes, and that cognitive wholeness is way different than I thought until preparing for this. And I think this is a much bigger conversation.
But we planted a seed for the next one.
Yes. Yes,
It was
indeed.
great to chat with you.
Oh, thank you, Victoria, so much. Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. And thank you, everybody who joined us today. I'll get those links to Christina, and she'll have them up on attached to this broadcast. So many
Be well.
blessings.